Powell, thank you so much for being with us.
Hello.
I've originally been doing like a sort of tell us a bit about you and your background, but that sort of is what this interview is. So I might just start and we'll just work our way through. And as you know, our topic for the week is work-life balance, and that's sort of, I'd like to talk our way through your career, but also into trying the sort of key life decisions about, you know, having a family, moving away from London, moving to London, all that sort of thing. Yeah. So I suppose the first thing is, what is your background? Where are you from, and how did you discover theatre?
So I'm from Herefordshire, which is on the Welsh border, and I went and did a degree in something else, in educational philosophy and that, and then for many years I came into theatre basically really late. I really liked theatre and that, but we didn't have, where I came from, theatre courses, or you couldn't kind of do drama classes or anything like that.
Yeah.
So when I got to university, I kind of got into theatre there. But then again, I thought, well, I didn't understand what everything was about theatre and that. So I went and did normal jobs and that, lived in Brighton for about 8 years. And then one day had one of those moments of, you know, this is ridiculous, Lizzie. You really love theatre and you want to be a technician, because that's what I wanted to be, a technician in either sound or lighting or something. Go and apply and see if you can get on a course, which I did, and got let into LAMDA, which was fantastic. And that was back in the day that they were able to give me a grant, because I said to them I didn't have any money, because I didn't have any money, and I said, so if you do let me in, can you give me some money to do it, because I can't pay you. So they did, which was brilliant. And so yeah, I had 2 years at LAMDA. When I went to LAMDA, I was trying to think about this the other day, I was probably 26 or 27. So it was a lot later than perhaps your average student at that time.
Sure.
And yeah, so that's me. That's how I got to London from the West Country.
Yeah, and was that a big jump? I mean, for me, moving to London was like a huge thing. Was that still a big thing, even though you'd done Brighton and that sort of...
Because like, I think Brighton there's this thing about living by the sea and that. It's it's a very different sort of city, and it's very much more chilled, and very different to when you go to London, and it's all of a sudden it does feel massive, and it does feel quite. I mean, you're very safe, obviously, in a college situation, because you are within a group of people that you get to know really closely, as you know, if anyone else has done college before, you know. So that's all you feel very safe that way. But after leaving the course and that, then London starts to feel very big all of a sudden, because you're not in the safety zone of being in a college, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I kind of, it's interesting because, like, obviously, you know, London theatre and that is a very world-renowned, world-beating sort of thing, and so it's quite, you know, to have studied in London was fantastic. But I was very keen from the off to do touring. I really wanted to tour. That was my thing. I just wanted to get around Britain, get around Europe if I could, be a lighting technician. So that's kind of what I did.
That's brilliant. And how much do you know, now looking back at your training, did you enjoy the course at the time?
I did. I was really lucky. When I did my interview in that, I was very honest. I said, you know, I've not ever studied this sort of thing. I've not, I don't have an understanding of, you know, what it is to be a technician or what it is to be a stage manager, or, you know, I didn't know those sorts of things existed. And I enjoyed it because I hadn't come from that. So I got to do, in the first year, all of the different disciplines. It was only a 2-year course back then. I don't know if it's changed at all. But in the first year, you got to have a go at all the different disciplines. Yeah. And pretty early on, I realised stage management wasn't for me, because, you know, best will in the world, I'm really not very good at all the paperwork. You certainly used to be. But I loved the lighting and I loved sound. And then in the second year, you then got to sort of be a head of lighting, head of sound in productions and that. And that's when I kind of, I was really lucky because I had Matt Jury, who is now at the National Theatre, head of lighting at National Theatre. He was my lecturer in lighting. And also TAF, Paul Rowland, who was head of lighting at Lambda as well. They were really good to me, and they really took me under their wing. And, you know, with a couple of us, do you know what I mean, who showed that we were really interested, and they sort of embraced us and kind of helped us to make contacts in the outside world, you know, sent us on technician jobs and that, you know, which was great. And also there was a lovely guy called Mac, who's sadly not with us anymore, who was our he was our production manager, he was head of basically the theatre at the college. And he'd worked with Complicité, with DV8, with all these companies that I really loved. Okay. And he took me under his wing, basically, and sent me, my placement was sent out with doing a European tour with Complicité, which was pretty amazing. Because we did we went to Sarajevo, we went to Poland, Warsaw, we went to Helsinki. It was an amazing placement to have had. I'm very lucky. Yeah, it was like making the contacts.
And how you'll be pleased to know as well that Paul's still there and still is fantastic.
Oh, brilliant! He was just amazing. He was anyone who showed this enthusiasm and like that. He just sort of. He's so knowledgeable, you know, and so sort of, it was brilliant. Yeah.
And how? So, I mean, you said about Complicity and Deviate and people like that. I mean, how did you sort of? Because I remember certainly when I went to drama school, you know, I was like, right, well, all I'm going to do is like musicals because that's what you do when you go to London. So, and then I discovered a world. How did you discover these companies and that was what you loved?
Because when I went to university back when I was 20. We had at the university this, because I had this kind of love of drama and all the rest of it, and dance as well. And Complicité toured a show, 3 Lives of Lucia Cabrera, into the theatre, in the town. And we all went, there was a group of us who all loved theatre and all the rest of it, even though we weren't doing that. And we all went and went, whoa, this is amazing. What the heck is this? Never seen anything like it in my life. Blew my mind. And, you know, so that's how I got into Complicité and started, you know, trying to figure out how to go and see them again. Most of it. And then Deviate, same thing in Brighton. When I was living in Brighton, they were again playing in one of the theatres. It was called Happy Days or something like that, or Happy Birthday or something. And a group of us again just kind of went, should we come and see what these guys are like? And again went, oh my God, that's something else. And then started watching all of their DVDs and all this stuff. And that's how I kind of got into that. So, well, I was lucky enough that there were other people perhaps who were much more knowledgeable than me, kind of going, I've heard about this group. I think you'll like it. Come along. But a lot of people kind of go, Lizzie, I think you'll like this.
And do you think that sort of training, I mean, I'm thinking particularly in terms of, you know, you're so often told in training about this sort of work-life balance, and you're sort of warned about it, and, you know, the training generally is long hours. Do you think that you benefited going slightly later than the average person? Do you think that made a difference to you?
I think that for me, it was the perfect thing to do, because I felt more confident in myself, because I was a very, very shy person, so I needed those years. But also I like the fact that I've done what I'd call like normal jobs, soft jobs. You know, I worked in the Brighton bead shop for many years as a stock. Counting stock of beads and things like that, you know, or I worked in, like, you know, Miss Selfridge's for years and years and all the rest of it as well. But I think that was really good for me to do that, because it's sort of, and also it gives for me a sense of there's something else other than theatre. You know what I mean? It's not, you know, that there is a proper life out there that, you know, like the majority of my friends are not in any way near theatre. They're not involved in theatre because of my background before. So
I think that's great, because it can feel especially, I mean, no, we're not here to talk about what's going on at the minute, but it does feel like we are shouting into a bubble of our own people, You know, it's nice to have that wider acknowledgement of the world, isn't it?
Isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Because it's, it does feel like you're sort of shouting into the echoes getting back to you instead of going out. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, now you look back at that training, do you think it was essential that you had trained? I mean, you mentioned the fact that what you got was contacts, I suppose, really, but do you ever wish that you hadn't trained and you'd just gone straight in, hands-on sort of style?
I don't know how I would have done that.
Just
because I didn't have in Brighton, I didn't have in any other places. And I certainly didn't have the balls to do it. To kind of go in and say, really, can I get a job with you? Do you know what I mean? So I honestly don't know how I would have got around it. I needed to, it wasn't so much for learning about, how to wire a plug or, in the basis of, that was really important to me, obviously, as a technician afterwards, is, how to, go about a rig, etc. But I said I remember in my interview, I sort of said to them, look, I'm coming here because I want to work in theatre and I need contacts. And I think you were the guys who've got the contacts. And they all laughed at me, but they agreed. And they said, that's what we can give you. That's a big part of our course, is that we can send you out into the theatre world and get you good experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that happened. Yeah. So it was important for me to go to college. Yeah. But then again, I have a couple of friends, in fact, who didn't go to and study at college, and they were lucky enough to start off in local theatres and that, and then work through and then get into, I think touring's a brilliant thing. I have to say, like, if you're able to tour, if you're able to sort of, get out, because you get to see a lot of different venues, but also it's like how you're working with people and that understanding how other departments work in that is invaluable. And I only ever got that really from the touring.
It's such a steep learning curve, isn't it?
You're in and it's got to go up. You've got to, but it was also really good for me, lighting design wise as well, I think, of an understanding of if you're given a show to light, but it's going to go on a certain tour, and whether that tour is a small scale or a mid scale or a large scale, that what sort of get-in times you have and all the rest of it. I think that's really important to have a proper understanding of what that is. And that's what I get from my touring days and my technician days, is what is manageable within a rig. Because, there's no point in sticking up, 50 movers if you've got absolutely no time in order to, reprogram all of those positions and that ready for the performance that night that you obviously did into. So, yeah.
And did you find it hard? I mean, the touring lifestyle can be really tricky. I mean, obviously it depends on the tour and the schedule and all these things, but did you find it tricky to essentially have a life at the same time?
I didn't. I just flung myself, to be honest, I flung myself into the touring lifestyle. Yeah. I had a life. I was living in between London and Brighton. Didn't really have a place to live because I couldn't really afford to rent anywhere in London at the time. So I had, my stuff was at my friends in Brighton, but I was going in between the two and then off. I'd go off for a few months and then come back, and most of my life was within the touring world. So yeah.
And so did you move out of London sort of instantly then after training? I moved out of London probably straight after, but was sort of sleeping on floors in London, if you know what I mean. Yeah. For a couple of years, and then moved back to London for a couple of years, then moved away again. And then even since I've, had my daughter and most of it, moved down again for a couple of years, and I've now moved away again. So I've been very flexible with London. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so you obviously did your sort of touring stint, and then what was the next step? I mean, I know we're going to touch on sort of you did some assistant work, but I mean, what was the next step for you?
At the same time as doing sort of touring stuff and that, I was started to getting into. So I'd been about 31 when I did put my first sort of lighting design into the Battersea Arts Centre in one of their studios. Nice. And did that with a couple of friends from college actually, and a couple of shows with them, and the typical thing that you do when you're starting out, in a different, you don't get paid for it and like that because you're all just trying to put on a show, as it were, in a studio. Yeah. But at the end of that year, I got my first £50 for a lighting design, which was like, I felt it was amazing. Yeah. And from there, of being in that space, and also in Soho Theatre, I think it was, I'm just trying to remember now, that I got to meet a couple of other directors. I think it's really important, the meeting people. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and I met a few people when I was touring, going into places and that as well. So I was really lucky. A couple of the little shows that we did, there were small studio pieces and that. They did get to go like down to Plymouth or Portsmouth, or and so from that, you started to get a little name for yourself, as it were. And
that meeting people thing, that never stops, does it? I mean, it's sort of
never stops. Like it's and it's really important as well to keep that going, because I'm very lucky that I've managed to get myself a career out of something that I utterly love doing, and that and I can't tell you how lucky I am. But it is about being open to meeting different people. It doesn't mean that you have to go to every single, because I certainly can't, because I have a family and all the rest of it. So I don't do all the, business that perhaps other people are able to do, which is going to meet people at press nights or things like that. I don't do that, but it's just about being open to the possibilities of when, you go in somewhere and you've taken one show in, and if word gets around, if you're really lovely and you go into a theatre somewhere and you're going to light a show there, or you're taking a show of yours in there, and you'll get on really well with, the head of lighting who is helping you out, or the crew, or, the producers, whatever, word gets around that you're a nice person to work with, and that goes a long way in the whole world, because there's a lot of really amazing lighting designers in Britain and that, and I think people always want to work with people who are quite nice at the end of it.
Yeah, well, that's the bit you can't teach, isn't it, really? I mean, or one of the bits you can't teach. And do you think, so I mean, you said you sort of bounced around from near London, not London, in London. Did that meeting people thing, if you, so say in the moments where you were very much not in London, or like now when you're in Glasgow now, how, when someone, or you see somebody you want to go for a coffee with, or they write to you, or how do you now negotiate that? What would your advice be to someone who doesn't live in London for meeting people who maybe are based in London?
So what I think everyone has discovered now, which I was kind of like doing before this business happened, is that if there were directors or designers who are interested in working with you, I'd always sort of say, should we Skype each other first of all, or should we call each other? And I've always done that because I've been living in Glasgow now on and off for about 10 or 11 years, and so like that's what I've always done, that because there's no point in running down to somewhere, if you don't get on straight, if you don't have a conversation to begin with,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that includes everyone, and they're always really happy to do that. People have always been really happy to do that, and I think even more so now, because there's an understanding now that actually this technology that we're doing right now is really useful. You know what I mean? It's because and then after that, then it's and it is easy enough to. I was saying to you, Rory, earlier on, it's sort of. Sometimes Britain can feel massive because you're in your own space and you're in your own, but it's not, it's so small. It's like, I love trains anyway, but like, Glasgow, and I'm at the other end, Glasgow to London is like, 4 hours, I don't know what it is, 4 hours 20, something like that, it's really quick. That is really, really quick. And it's a lovely journey. You get all the work done if you want to, or watch films, or do you know what I mean? But there's like I'd rather be living up here in a brilliant city, which it is. Yeah. I can see you nodding there, Ian. It is though, and we're really lucky to live here. I feel really lucky to live here. I don't want to live in London. Yeah. I feel that, I can't afford to live in London anyway, but also it doesn't offer anything for me and my family,
Yeah, and that is part of why I really wanted to talk to you about this, because I sort of knew that, and I think it's really, I think we get really swept up in looking at our Lighton heroes and so on, and you go, and they must live in London, or they must have, a flat in like a mega part of London, but they don't really live there. That's just for when they're doing and you're like, that's not everyone's reality, and not everybody wants that. Yeah, it's not, and not everybody wants that. It's So I mean, if we go back to the sort of career bit for a second, you assisted Rick Fisher on the original Billy Elliot, didn't you?
I did.
How was that?
God almighty. I was like, oh, brilliant, Ian. It's incredible. So again, this all came out of my college, actually. I got put forward for a bursary with this thing called Nesta, what was happening at the time, and they were trying to get, it was based around the arts and science, and so there was a couple of aspiring scientists as well got bursted up. And one of the arts ones was in design, and they were looking that year at lighting. And so I kind of won this bursary to be mentored by Rick Fisher, which was pretty amazing. So I had a year of basically being able to follow him around. I was doing my own sort of like technical, still working and all that of it. But then, so I went to Venice with him for 2 weeks. Because he was lighting an opera in Venice, like in a February, and it was snowing, and it was just like, what? Yeah. To opera, let alone to Venice, watching an opera and watching someone light it. And it was just like incredible. And then he said, right, next year I'm doing Billy Elliot, Lizzie. I can get you in for doing all the tech period and the previews and that. I'd really like, so again, it was just off the fact that they gave me some money that I was able to pay the rent, so I could do it. It was incredible. And so, I was his assistant and sat with him, and Stephen Daldry was just on the other side of the aisle, and all of them, greats of that show were there. And we just sat for. We started it. It was snowing, I remember. So we started it in end of January. And the press night was, I'm going to say end of April. I can't remember now. I might be wrong. Okay. So it's quite a long process. Yeah. And it was a mind opener. It was, and looking back on it now, I'd love to see the original rig actually, because at the time it was like, oh my God, this is massive. How are we going to cope with, all of this? And my little brain was going, oh my God, But I think probably if we look back on it now, the technology that was being used back then was quite basic in in comparison to some of the rigs you see nowadays on these musicals and the rest of it. But it was a beautiful thing. I was very proud to be a part of it, and to apparently our names are still on the back of the programme as
fantastic
original company, which is like lovely.
That's so lovely. Yeah. Do you think that, like now, later down the line, do you feel that assistance stood you in good? I mean, especially early doors of your own design career, did that prove to be a really useful thing for you?
Yeah, because people thought that. I mean, basically, I was making cups of tea and coffee and trying to be helpful, and I was doing sort of like the follow spot. I think my job was to take care of the follow spots and just make a note of, you know, that during the show, you know what I mean, who was doing what, and, you know, and being there, liaison with them. And but people see that you've, like, you know, worked on Billy Elliot, the first B. Elliot, or even the Complicité thing, which was massive, and people go, oh God, yeah, so she must know her onions then. Yeah, well, we'll trust in that, you know.
Yeah.
Which at the end of the day, you were like, I was, honestly, on both jobs, I was just making cups of coffee and tea and sweeping the stage, and, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, I was lucky, you know, super lucky. But I was really, it was amazing having a mentor like Rick. He was, you know, it was invaluable to me, because he, again, he'd given you that confidence in yourself, and that's what he gave to me. So it was brilliant.
And that's it's so true what you said there about people's perception. I mean, it's one of the things that rightly or wrongly is all through the industry, isn't it? I mean, we spoke earlier about you know, oh, you couldn't possibly like this kind of show because you've never lit one before like this, and you go, so how do you ever, what are you meant to do then? Who gives you that shot? But correct me if you disagree, but I mean, it feels like those people that give you those shots were the connections that you made early doors. Yeah,
they were, and then from there, meeting other people. I would always say, I when National Theatre Scotland set up, and that my now partner, my now boyfriend, he moved up to be part of that original team, and I got to know Vicky Featherstone through him, and that, and she as a director has been invaluable as well, again, but it's the same thing, that because she really shouts for the underdog. So there'd be like, when we did I think it was Our Ladies of Perpetual Succour, I lit for her, and it started off, in I've forgotten where we did it in, probably Trav. Yeah, it was in Trav 1 for the festival.
Okay.
It went to Live Theatre in Newcastle, which is basically a little cabaret space in the corner of a room where, people sit with their bottles of wine just around the little stage. It's great. And then it went down to the national, I call it Cotswold. It's not Cotswold anymore, is it?
It's the Dorfman now, I think. But yeah.
It went from there. So the kind of like the different spaces that you're going to, and then it ended up on the West End. And I do remember that the producers of the West End stuff were sort of questioning is the design of Chloe's design, is that spectacular enough for West End? Okay. Is what Lizzie's doing, we should perhaps think about other people, and all this bit. And I remember that Vicky was very, no, this is the team, because this is the aesthetic we are looking for. We're not looking for massive bling and massive, this is about a set of girls who are telling a story in a shitty old village hall in Oakland. Do you know what I mean? It's not bling, and it's not, and anyone else touching it will sort of, mess it up, not understand where it's coming from. And, she always has that sort of, she's a strong woman, and she's sort of going, no, you know what I mean? And I love, that's fantastic. So it was great to have that sort of backing off her as well. It's about making those contacts though,
Yeah.
It's about, and I was, again, lucky enough to get that one as well. But that was the first time I'm moving away from London area. But what I realised really quickly on was that even though I did my college in London, a lot of my work was in what they call regional work. I'd say all my really interesting stuff was, and it still is, being done in Manchester, in Newcastle, in Liverpool, and obviously in Glasgow and in Edinburgh and all the rest of it. All the sort of stuff that I consider to be really good bits of theatre and really challenging and all the rest of it are not as much. There's only been a few in London that I've really felt, which again would be with Vicky at the Royal Court. You know what I mean? The ones that I've kind of felt, oh yeah, that's quite interesting. That's but yeah, and so I've not missed, even though I've moved back to London for a few years with the family. and then moved back up again for starting a school, you know, and all the rest of it. But yeah, I feel that you don't have to. I am an advocate for you do not have to live in London. You can live anywhere in Britain and get a really good career, a really exciting career, I should say. Do you know what I mean? Of doing work that is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's most definitely. It's a really positive thing, I think, because nowadays I think it's getting harder and harder to live down there. And anyway, for us, you know, for us all. And also, I think what may start to happen is that more of the sort of theatres, once we can start making work again and all the rest of it, there's going to be I think there's going to be this massive explosion of new talent. Looking at you guys, do you know what I mean? But like and with the writers and all the rest of it, that's going to have so much that they'll you know want to create, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to happen, to my mind, where it's going to be easier to do it in Manchester and in and
they're also the places that take the risks, because I feel like you feel really valued, don't you? Because you're essentially producing work for their sort of community, really. I mean, London feels very, it's not the right word for it, but it does feel very commercial, even in the smaller scale stuff. You know, it is about trying to get people in, and you look at these places out and about and you go, but you're doing this because you have a really loyal audience. Yes, there's people come in, but like, you can recognize the same. Sometimes you go back and you're like, oh, you're the same people that come to this show that I did once before, and there's something so nice
and that's really good. It's actually like so when you do a show in like in London, like very often in the places like in the smaller places, whatever, which aren't the commercial ones, but what you tend to see in the audiences is the same audience who are theatre audience. They're people who work in theatre or work within the arts, and that's what you see. And then obviously then you have the commercial stuff geared towards, you know, your tourists and all the rest of it to generate, you know, the economy of, you know, down there, of the theatre economy, which is all great and it's all well placed and needs to happen.
Yeah.
But in us and in Scotland and in Wales as well, and in the regions in England, you get I think a bigger variety of audience who are local and loyal, but they're just folk who aren't perhaps connected to theatre as much. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
When just before we locked down, my last show I lit, which was at the end of February, I was at Dundee Rep, and I did a show called Smile, which Phil Differ, anyone you might know of Phil Differ, is a football writer, and he's a writer. He wrote this play, and he wrote a show about Dundee United, about one of the managers there, who's a notorious manager. And so normally, obviously, on your sort of previews and all the rest of it, what we tend to be used to is quite a lot of women of a certain age sometimes with partners, male partners and that. But, you know, the majority of the audience would veer towards women. And, you know, and on the previews, I've never seen such seas of men of differing ages, but blocks of men dotted around. Might be a woman every now and then, but it was just seas upon seas of men. And these men sat in this theatre. It was a two-man show, and it wasn't like, you know, sort of show. It was a proper. It was funny, but it was also it was dealing with a manager's sort of mental health, I suppose, in some way, and also his slight demise going into dementia and all that. So, you know, it had this hard-hitting thing as well. And they were engaged, they were shouting out at some of the, because obviously they were Dundee United fans, and there were, you know, a couple of placed, you know, bits that were put in. But at the end of it, I was watching all of these blokes crying their eyes out, laughing their eyes out, standing at the end ovations and that was the last show I lit. And I'm so glad that it was a show like that. So on press night, do you know what I mean? You've got them roaring. And if you hear a football crowd, if you've been to the football and you hear a football crowd roar, that's what it sounded like in the theatre. And I was like, you know, grabbing Sally Reid, who was the director, kind of going, this is what it should be like, you know, it's war, this kind of feeling of passion and this kind of like, do you know what I mean? So it was a good one to have ended on, as in, you know, for this bit, because it's kind of gives you a bit of heart, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's why I like doing, that's why I think I get a lot more out of those sorts of shows, do you know what I mean? Which I think in Scotland and in the regions in England and that, they feel like we were saying before, Rory, that they're braver, that they will take those sorts of shows on and do them. It's harder to put those sorts of shows on in London, I think.
Yeah.
So, you know.
And, I mean, you mentioned Our Ladies. That's a really interesting example, isn't it? Because it started geared up towards a festival crowd. It ran in various places that would have like local audiences, and I'm fairly sure it did like the sits and stuff, and you know, like all those sort of places that would have a local audience. But then it moved to London and did its the sort of more tourist-based thing. Do you find that over the process of all of those moves, did it ever change how it felt? That's a really, can you tell this was an unplanned question, but like, did it ever sort of get played differently because it was a sort of different, geared up to a different set of audience?
We had that very conversation about going down to London with it. If anyone who doesn't know that particular show, the girls have a very Scottish accents in it, and some of the writing is very. I don't know. There is certain terms of phrase in that would be very Oban or very Edinburgh, because they go to Edinburgh. Do you know what I mean? Which are, you know, perhaps if your ear isn't tuned in to a deep Scottish, you know, Oban accent or a deep you know, Leith accent, or you know, whatever, that you know, you might not get everything. Yeah. And so we had that conversation of what do we do? Do we tone down the accents? Do we swap over some of these, you know, for terms of phrase and all this of it? And we decided not to. We asked the locals, actually, well, you know, the people in London, like, because it first went to Cottesloe, and we did a dress and asked them there, what's your feelings? Do your ears get tuned in to how, you know? And they were like, yeah. It said, right, within the first 5 minutes, you don't realise it, but you can understand. So we didn't play to the whole, we're Scottish and we're going to tone it down for you in the end, which was better for the show, because it wouldn't have worked as well if it couldn't be a soft show. It's not a soft show. It's a, you know, a hard hitting you know, fight of a show, basically. So yeah.
Totally. Ellen's asked here, did you have an associate or assistant for Our Ladies who helped you with the rig changing with the different venues?
So yes, so I basically had a amazing guy called James Gardner, and he's a theatre lighting technician. Has one of those brains that he just understands stuff that, you know, technology, which is on a different level. You know, he's quite incredible with it. And he started off as my sort of head of lighting, as it were, chief, we used to call, and when we started it. And then when we knew it was going on the second year, going to go and do a tour in England and then go down to the National, and I said to them, I want an associate, and it needs to be James, because it's his show as well. So I think what you find is when you are working with someone and building a show together, he programmed it for me as well. And when you're building that show together, it's not my show anymore, it's both of your show, because you just the way it works and the rhythm of it and all the rest of it, the understanding of it, you know, it wouldn't have. So he stayed with that show, as in every time it went out again, or every time it went to a different place. So he also put it into the West End for me as well, with me. Do you know what I mean? But like for me, he sort of, you know, which was fantastic, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. You know, it was a lovely thing, and it was, you know, pictures of us outside posters pointing at the poster and going, "We're in the West End." Which is great. I mean, it was a lovely thing to have done. But he was, and I love it when you can. One day I'll get famous enough and rich enough, I doubt it, but to have associates all the time. Do you know what I mean? That I can just sort of say, I can, pay and sort of say, right, you will be my, but it depends on the gig. If you're doing like, you do get asked, if you're doing a bigger gig and all that, you get asked, is there someone you like programming for you? Because it's so important. It is so important to have someone who you get on really well with programming wise, because I like to ask people's opinion about stuff as well. I like the conversation. Do you know what I mean? It's not about just kind of going, It's about having conversations about how it's working, or, and it's people who are, I've worked with. So James is definitely one of them. There's a few now who I've met and all the rest of it that, I'd definitely go back to again and that.
Yeah.
And also, I'm really interested as well in sort of, with people incoming as well, of, taking, if there is a chance to sort of do a show where, I can have an assistant who was doing basically what I was doing on Billy Elliot. Do you know what I mean? Like, be in there and sort of giving a voice, a valued voice and all the rest of it, and chatting about it. And then, I think that's a really good way of learning. I think that's a really good way of learning about the process. And it's really good for me to sort of learn about it as well, because we never stop learning about what you're doing,
And do you find now that you have a family and you live up where you live and stuff, do you find that there is a bit of a thing, isn't there, sometimes about, well, you can have an associate or an assistant or whatever if you pay for them? Is that something you've ever entertained the thought of, or how that must be a really hard decision when you're not just supporting yourself, you're supporting a family as well?
Yeah, I haven't so far with the assistants I've had, or the associates I've had so far, the companies have paid for them.
Good.
So NTS, National Theatre of Scotland up here, have done a couple of times, especially on the shows that they know are going to have legs and they're going to travel.
Yeah.
Because it makes more sense to have a proper team on it. You know what I mean? It's not just a skeleton team, but there are people who they will record that and sort of archive it properly and all the rest of it. So I've not had to, out of a fee that I get, pay for. Oh, I have, sorry, twice I have. And I've done it deliberately so on a couple of Christmas shows I've done. Because it was going to be a nightmare otherwise, so I got in an associate on both occasions. A lovely, actually up in Scotland, Elle Taylor, and she did a couple of things for me, which was fantastic, because it was well worth. I think in the end I just split the fee with her. I said to her, look, let's do this together, let's have some fun, let's eat some mince pies, and let's try and learn something together. And that's what we did, which is great. So I would do it if I was, and especially if I was getting, I mean, you all obviously know that it isn't brilliant pay wise, but if I was getting a gig that was a really good pay and all the rest of it, then, and knew that it needed an assistant or associate, but wasn't, programmed into the thing, then I would definitely, without hesitation.
And what is the I'm not necessarily talking numbers here, but what is that process for you? Because what I'm really keen on is, so for me, I just have to pay rent at the minute. I don't have anyone that I support. I don't have a family. How do you work out the difference between, like, here's what I want to pay you, but I also really need to have X amount for myself, otherwise this isn't financially viable? That must be a tricky balancing act.
Yeah, it kind of is. It's sort of, I think the way I have to be, I'm honest. I don't want to do anyone over if I'm, what I mean, because they also need to pay rent and all the rest of it as well. And so, you just work out the amount of time that the person can give you. And I just do it from there. I you know, we don't. Yeah, we have a family and that, but at the end of the day, we don't. It's not like we're riding around in Jags or anything like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, you know, you it's same with all of you. You know, do you know what I mean? You work away to sort of.
Yeah.
I'm not very good, to be honest with you, because I would be, let's split it, but I know that you don't do that, you know.
Yeah, it's hard. It is really hard. Before we move on, Ian's asked, which of the Scottish venues that you've lit shows in do you prefer?
Oh, Citizens Theatre would be my number one. At the moment it's under refurb, and it will be for the next couple of years. I've been so lucky to light a few shows there, and it is the most beautiful theatre. It's when you sit in it as a punter, it's the most intimate. It's a proper theatre. You know, it just feels amazing watching a show in there, and it's really beautiful to light a show in there as well. It's a beautiful venue. So that's my favourite. But I mean, there are so many brilliant venues in Scotland, but that's my favourite venue.
Ian, go on. You've got to tell us yours now, because now that Lizzie knows.
Well, it was interesting because I know that you've also done stuff at Perth Theatre as well. You did like Kes and everything else. Oh, yeah. How did doing the Dundee United thing at Dundee with Barry? How did that compare to doing Panto with Barry in Perth?
So Barry Hunter is a famous performer up here in Scotland, especially, and also writer and a director now. He directs Panto up here as well. But he was in the Smile production in Dundee, playing beautifully, quite a serious role, and but also he plays Dane in Pantos and that, and he's quite spectacular at that as well. It's Barry is, whichever way you get about it, he's just professional. He just sort of like he kind of attacked the parts and that in the sack. He uses the same method. So even if he's playing a Dane, he's still so professional with it. And I think any actor worth their salt would be the same. So whether you're playing Hamlet or you're playing sort of, you know, Flora MacDonald, the wife of whatever, you know, you should still attack the role in the same way. And he did that, you know, all the way through. What was interesting is that in the pantomimes that he does, he has obviously a lot more of a creative role because he leads the pantos and all the rest of it. Whereas in Smile, you know, he was an actor on stage with another actor, and Sally Reid was our director. So that was quite interesting for him, I think, to sort of quite nice, I think, to let go of some of that visual stuff that he would have in his head of what does this look like? What does this feel? Do you know what I mean? Like he could concentrate on what he was doing on stage and not worry about, you know.
So,
yeah.
To answer your question, Rory, I have great fondness for Perth Theatre because that's where I cut my teeth in youth theatre. But I also the first pantomime I ever went to was at the Sits, so I have a great affection for the Sits as well.
And the Sits also, just going to give a little plug, they always, and hopefully they'll do it when they reopen again as well. They always do this day, a Saturday, where everyone queues up because used to be 50p, I think it's £1 now. You can buy your tickets for £1. So basically, everyone from the Gorbals, which even if you don't know Glasgow, you might know the Gorbals. It would be sort of considered perhaps a poorer area of Glasgow, and they all line up, and the line goes down the street, it goes round the corner, and all the rest of it for their £1 tickets to go and see a show. And it's on every show that they do. Doesn't matter whether they're doing Beckett or whether they're doing the Christmas show, whatever, they do that, which I think is incredible. And they always get the actors to sort of like be there in the foyer to sort of help sell the tickets as well for £1. I mean, like, bloody hell.
Yeah, you kind of look at it and go, well, if they can do it, come on, more people need to be doing this.
They have so many tickets. I don't know how many hundred it is now, but they say these are going to be £1. You know what I mean? Everyone else pays normal price, but
and the queues are huge, aren't they? I mean, like
it's massive. They're brilliant, and it's all locals. Do you know what I mean? They're all like.
Yeah, and you do wonder. I mean, I'd love to know the sort of numbers behind it, but you think, God, I wonder if these are people who would never go normally, but they're like, well, it's only £1. Like, I mean,
you're in the theatre all the time. You say that, but
yeah.
I remember them coming to see. We did a couple of Becketts in one night or something like that. And a couple of the Carol Churchills as well. And another season we did. And do you know what I mean? They come and watch them, and they're like, you know, and then they're in the bar afterwards and chatting away about them. And they might sort of say, didn't really understand that one. I like that one though, because of, and you're like, oh, that is brilliant. Do you know what I mean? They've no idea, you know, who these writers are and that, which is exciting in itself. And they've really got something out of it, even if they didn't enjoy it or they didn't like it or whatever. They're having a really good chat about it. And that's what, you know, at the end of the day, we're telling stories and hopefully people will chat about them afterwards, you know. That's
completely.
Isn't it?
Totally. Yeah. Now that you, I was going to say live at the other end of the country, but you know what I mean. Now that you live in Glasgow, do you think it's easier or harder for you to get work, or has that not really changed because you've dotted about so much?
For me, it hasn't changed because of, I suppose, no, it hasn't really changed. It's interesting, isn't it? It hasn't really changed that much. Because I think when we moved back up again the second time, I got to that point in my career where I'd opened enough doors of knowing people and that I did last year, it was last year, Dial M for Murder, which was my first ever commercial show to light. So as in commercial, as in it went to every single like mid-scale to large-scale theatre in Britain, really. Had a couple of famous folk in it. And and the producers got hold of me for that, I can't remember what they'd seen or whatever, but and I know I worked on that with the Ringham brothers who did the sound on it and all the rest of it. And that was fantastic because it was my first, I never thought of doing a commercial thing like that, but we worked hard on it and all the rest of it. It was all done very quickly. It was interesting. Not much time to tech and stuff like that. But that's the way those sorts of producers work. Do you know what I mean?
You're not selling tickets if you're teching.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's sort of like it came up to Theatre Royal in Glasgow actually, and it's you know, they all had a great time and all the rest of it. It got stopped obviously during lockdown, so they only had about 6 venues left. But that was a massive tour. That was like, you know, going everywhere in Britain to all of those big old places, theatres and all the rest of it.
Did you feel really proud when it appeared at like your local?
I did. I mean, like that kind of. I mean, it's Dial M for Murder, which is great. You know, it's great fun to do those sorts of. You know what I mean? It's, you know, it's not high intellect stuff or anything, but it's really good entertainment. Yeah. You know what I mean? And we treated it again, you know, seriously, and we did some really interesting sort of stuff during scene changes in it or things like that. Do you know what I mean? We didn't just sort of shove on, which I thought the producers thought we were going to do. It was just sort of like, oh, it's daylight in a room. Oh, it's night time in a room. Oh, you know, here's the murder. We didn't kind of do that. You know, we really kind of messed with it a bit, and they were really pleased. So out of that, do you know what I mean? The same producer. So next year, hopefully, I get to do another commercial one. Do you know what I mean? The Da Vinci Code. I mean, like if we can do it, And and that was fantastic. So in response to your question about whether my work has changed, it's changed slightly, but I think being up here hasn't altered the fact that I know I'm not in people's eye all the time down in London, but I am in people's eye in Manchester or in Newcastle or in, you know, and which are equally as important. Do you know what I mean?
And do you think that would that have, you know, I'm acutely aware that there was a London bias initially. Do you think that was essential? Do you think that things could have been so different if you had trained somewhere else, or if I'll say if you trained somewhere else?
I think I think I wouldn't have made the same contacts that I did, most definitely. And I didn't know what those contacts were going to be, but because I did think I kind of really wanted to go to Bristol to train because I'd heard that, you know, it was, you know, a really good course there and all the rest of it, and also the Welsh college, so I think it would have been, but I don't think it would have been anyway as long as I kept my enthusiasm and I got, which you do in most of these places, get these lecturers and that who are just so brilliant and so sort of supportive and all the rest of it. And, you know, I think my enthusiasm would have still gone for it, and I'd still wanted to create work whether or not anyone else was pay me or whatever, or you know, those pieces that we did when I first came out of college. You know, as I said, I was working as a technician on tours and all the rest of it, and you know, and doing all that whilst lighting things for nothing, you know, because we were creating bits of work for, you know, nobody was getting paid at all. We were trying to pay actors, you know, as much as we could, but that was it. So, and I think I'd just still done that, definitely, you know, whichever group of people it was that I'd made friends with, you know.
No, I think it's really interesting here, because I think there is so much worry, isn't there, that London is the only way to do it. But actually, whilst those initial years, the sort of formative years of your career, can be really different depending on where you trained, I think you do sort of, whilst it all ties together, I think you where you end up, there's a bit, I feel quite strongly that you will end up where you're meant to end up. Like, you know, for you, I mean, like, you look at this and go, well, look at all these years down the line, you know, that first bit, you're now at a point where you can't necessarily trace it all back to that initial bit. You know, it's from where you've met other people and stuff.
Yeah. It's the journey, and it always will be the journey. It will be and it will change again, and it will change again. It's sort of not being stuck on one idea and getting fixated on that.
Yeah.
As in where to live or what it should be like. It's about being willing to, you know, change it, even if it might be really scary or whatever. Because of course it's scary every time you move to a different place or a different.
Yeah, I want to ask you about some of the practicalities in a minute, but Ellen's got a question. Ellen, if you're there.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So I wanted to ask, have you experienced much sexism both as a technician and as a lighting designer, and how have you combated it?
So I think I've been pretty lucky in my career that I haven't had loads. I've had a couple of experiences where I've had to walk away from a couple of people in the building. It happened in Ireland a couple of times, and in a couple of theatres in England. I think when I was starting out, I might not have even realised it was going on, because I was so scared the whole time anyway. Every time I went on stage to do a focus, whatever, I was shaking like a leaf. So so I might not even notice that if there was mutterings going on or whatever. But the times that I did notice, or when it was really blatant that, the only way I could deal with it, because otherwise I knew that I would probably want to headbutt them, is to walk away from it. But I didn't at the time, and I wonder now, because I haven't had any for years, just to me, and I've been very, that's all been great, and I think there's a wider knowledge now and a recognition of it, and that, you know, an understanding of appropriate sort of language and whatever, you know, for everyone working in theatre, not just females, but for, you know, everyone. And but I think that if I had had more knowledge about it, perhaps I would have gone to my manager or producer, do you know what I mean, or at the time, but I didn't. But I think that's the way to deal. I think it's changing for the good, and I most definitely do. It is definitely loads better than it would have been. And I'm talking about in sort of, you know, in theatres that perhaps don't get loads of female sound designers, lighting designers, whatever. Do you know what I mean? That they, you know, but it is changing, and it's a really positive thing that's happening at the moment. I mean, like, I can't think of anything for years that I've encountered, and I haven't let it. I think it's sort of, I haven't let it eat me away. But on the times that it did happen, just kind of thought, well, you know, you've obviously got, you know, you're obviously nervous about something, or you've got a bit of a problem. So, but that's your problem, and I hope you get around it. In my head, that's the way, you know, I dealt with it, and to just carry on. Do you know what I mean? And then, you know, there's a feeling. I don't know whether it's quite strange. I'm just sort of say to the blokes in our chat today that as a female, sometimes we might, because we're coming from a background of lighting designers was very much a male-dominated industry, that that when you go to ask for something or to change things, or when you're doing your focus in that there is sometimes a feeling of that you almost double question yourself before you ask for the change, or you doubly make sure you're doing the right thing, because perhaps you wouldn't have the confidence. It's very hard to describe, because we're all, all of us as lighting designers, all of us, whether you're male or female or whatever, we're all in the same situation. But there's because I might not know what that piece of cable does to that, piece of distro or whatever, it doesn't make me a lesser lighting designer. It just means that I just don't know that bit, and that's fine, and that's all right to acknowledge that, I think, as lighting designers, not just as a female, but it's getting as a female, it's for me to get over that, and say it's okay, it's all right, I don't know everything, because I certainly don't. Yeah, that was a bit long-winded, sorry. I don't know how to describe it, because when it happens to yourself, you don't really, it's very hard to describe these things. So
yeah, it's quite jarring, and you don't really know how you're supposed to respond to it.
And I really do feel it's sort of about, it's about, don't let it, you just sort of put it within yourself, but don't let it stay within yourself, and just, because things are changing for the good and for the better and for everyone, so it's good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wonder if we talk a little bit about the practicalities of living, we'll say, out with London. Is it a nightmare in terms of producers not wanting to pay digs? Is that a thing, or do you hide the fact that you're not London based?
So that's a really interesting question. So it depends on the theatre that you're working, or the company you're working for in London, if you're working in London. So you have to, into your contract straight away, make it known, make it really obvious that you are not London based, and make that blatant, because it's, a couple of times it's happened to me where they've come back and said, oh, we didn't realise that you were, not that they don't want me to do the job, but they hadn't worked into their own budgets or whatever that, the lighting designer would need for the tech part of things. She will need to stay somewhere, or I've very often slept on friends' floors down in London and stuff like that. So, yeah. But it's not ideal for techs and things like that, because obviously we're doing silly hours, etc. So, so now I'm honest. I for ages I kind of felt like, it's fine. I can just I can get through it, and they don't have to do this for me. But they do, actually. They do, and they have to acknowledge that. Which I think more and more this will happen, because more and more creatives and people who work in theatre won't necessarily be able to live in London or close to London, so they will more and more have to consider where these people stay. Yeah. You can't get a train back to somewhere at certain times at night. Do you know what I mean? Which has got, if you're getting trains at 11 o'clock at night in order to turn around at 6 a.m. again, you can't do that for 2 weeks on a trot. No. And do you have to plan for overnight stays for things like things that people maybe wouldn't presume, like the first day of rehearsals? I mean, down here you might jump on the tube at 8 o'clock in the morning, but to you that's what, a night in a hotel or a night at a mate's or whatever. Do you try and get that into the contract as well? Yeah, usually what you'd do is you'd get a travel allowance, and make sure that is, you'd say to your producer, okay, this travel allowance is for a recognised number of visits to London. And so you get that into your contract to make sure that you have that, and then make sure as well that it says that when you do need to stay overnight, usually I don't always need to stay overnight, and I love a train, so I will, get the milk train in the morning down to London, and then at 6:30, 7:00 at night, get the train back up to Glasgow, you know,
Yeah.
and I'll have a full day in London, seen everyone I need to see, etc., and be back home if I'm not needed for rehearsals, if it's for pre-meetings, you know, before rehearsals start and things like that. And that's absolutely fine. It's really easy to do. I'd rather do that than, you know, be hanging around when I'm not, you know, needed down there. So, but you just sort of make sure in your contract that is travel allowances there, and as, you know, as they tend to now sort of say, you know, when it's needed, overnight stays, and including techs through preview. Yeah, not all of the theatres now are able to afford it, so that's when I've stayed with friends or with, you know, with friends basically. So because they're not not all of the places are able to afford, or it's not written into their policy that people living outside of London which should be given accommodation. I perhaps they have a policy that, you know, it should be London-based artists who are working within the theatre. I don't know.
I was going to say, do you ever get kickback for it when you say, like, I'm going to need this, and this? Do you get the like, oh, well, that's you know, it just doesn't suit us sort of thing?
No, because I haven't done, because I'm just kind of pretty honest from the beginning.
Yeah.
As long as you sort of say to them that, you know, this is where I'm travelling from, how much do the producers and the director and that feel that that they want you, how much of a rehearsal process they want you to belong, you know, be in, and that, and then you work it from there. And then there's no surprises. Then there's no sort of like, well, we hadn't counted for that. We hadn't sort of, you know. Yeah.
And do you do all your pre-production production meetings, pre-production work? Do you do all that online? I mean, as you said, you've sort of done that for years anyway, but is that, I presume that is what gets you through?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is the way it's so, I mean, in Glasgow at the moment, I'm going to be doing something with the RCS in Tramway 1 with one of their courses, and with the technicians who are RCS is the college up here that trains the people going into theatre. And we're doing everything, because we're being really careful at the moment because of COVID and that, with the rehearsal room, that we're being really, really careful about how many people are in rehearsal rooms and stuff like that, and production meetings and things like that, you know, if you're not being able to get together for them. So everything is online. Yeah. And it's with my production meetings and that before, you know, with all the stuff in London or even in Manchester or Newcastle and stuff like that, you just, if you're not going down for a rehearsal, you just say, I'm not down actually for that, so I'll just be on computer. Yeah, that's it. And then everything else, obviously, like everything else that you're doing, like when you're drawing your plans or when you're talking, you know, with the theatre and that, most of that happens to be online anyway, like as in when you're sending things backwards and forwards and you're having those discussions about, you know, where things are being rigged and all the rest of it. As long as you get to see your theatre you're going into and you get a full understanding of what the, you know, all of the nooks and crannies and all the rest of it, then, you know, you should be fine. And, you know, and having a really good conversation, you know, it's all about that. It's all about making sure that keeps going with all of those different people. Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to ask was how, this is going to sound like an obvious question, but I think you know what I mean, but how much did your work-life balance change when you had your wee girl?
It's made me be in a lot more, as in, so before pre-child, my partner also works in theatre as a freelancer, so it's great. You didn't have to think about accepting a job, about when your texts were and the rest of it. You just be like, right, you know, build up your year and then, you know, go and do that, be out quite a lot. And it was all, you know, like that. When Owen came along, I took a few months off. I mean, I did take her to production meetings and that when she was about 4 months old. And in fact, Perth Theatre, I was doing a panto there, I think it was Cinderella. And I forgot who it was now, who was a young lad who was programming for me. Anyway, had quite an experience because I would breastfeed during the breaks when we were still trying to get because there was only no other time to sort of do it.
Right.
But I like to think I've enlightened that lad, so that was great. He was fine. He was like, should I get you a sandwich, Lizzie? Do you know what I mean? All the rest of it, it's all great. But yeah, what we do now is we make sure that before you kind of like, I think we're all quite similar people in that when we're working in theatre, that we all kind of, we like to do as much as we can. We kind of get really involved. I certainly feel like that. But I've pulled back from that a lot. I certainly don't do as many shows as I would normally have done. And I turn down stuff because I know I cannot go from tech to tech in the same way as perhaps I used to.
Yeah,
but that's really good for me. I think that's a really good thing. It's really positive for me. And it's the same for Neil as well, my partner. It's, same for him. We have to check in now. The rule is we have a joint calendar on our computers. And the rule is if you get offered a job, then you have to look at the calendar. You have to make sure that the other person isn't teching at the same region of time. And then you kind of work it from there. And so, and also when you're doing shows that are away from home, away from Glasgow, making sure that is a doable thing, that it's, because when obviously you're going to tech and that, you do know you're going to be away for usually about 2.5 weeks, all in all, tech, preview, etc. And so it's making sure that the whole family are happy with that, and that, that basically that there's only been once when me and Neil have turned around each other one night and so went, who's looking after Owen? When we realised that there were 2 jobs in the calendar. We'd forgotten, and it was about a week's time before it was going to happen. We'd forgotten his daughter. Terrible. But yeah, it has slowed down then. Shall I say slowed down? That seems really negative. It's not a negative thing at all. It's really
kind of become more manageable, it sounds.
It's manageable. And I think it's better for me. It's better for my headspace as well, because, I actually know what the shows are all about more. I'm a bit more involved in them, which is really good. Yeah. And sorry, because it's such a life thing, it's all quite personal, but did that, when you scaled back on shows, did that get difficult financially? Or Yeah, of course it does. It does. But also you have to remember that you're not out and about as much. Yeah. And so you're not in Pret all the time. It's not the rest of it. And also you're not out every night, having meals or in the pub or whatever, or you're not. So even though you're not taking on as many jobs, it's really manageable. It is really manageable in whatever station in life you are. I mean, like we live up in Glasgow, and Glasgow is a lot cheaper to live in than in London. Like, it's so much. I can't tell you how much cheaper it is to. And even so we were living down in London when Owen was about from the age of 1 to about 3.5 or something like that. And we had to make a decision pretty quickly. She was about to, if she had stayed in London, she'd had to start going to school. And we had to make that decision. And what we worked out is we couldn't afford to even live in Greater London, because we couldn't afford the rent still for that. Because I wouldn't have been able to work, basically. And so we had that big chat, which I think everyone has at some point in life, whether it's about family or whether it's about your own life. You have that big chat with yourself or with your partner about what is better for. So for us, the chat was what is better for the family and for Olwen. She's got 2 parents who work in a notoriously time-gobbling sort of careers, as in, you kind of do long days and it's really intense for 3 weeks, and then it calms down again, and so it's not a normal life at all. So it's better for her to be up or away somewhere that we can afford to live in, a nice flat that isn't a box, as it were, and that we can give proper time to her, because we can afford to scale back on the work. Absolutely. And that's what we've been able to do. So we're never going to be, rich millionaires, but that doesn't matter because we've got a really lovely work balance up here.
Yeah.
And I'm still really lucky, and Neil's still lucky that we're getting to do really interesting work still. You know what I mean? I think that's really important because it's really important that you're still being creative and doing the sort of work that you love doing, you know? Yeah.
So nice to hear. That is so nice to hear. We're sort of starting to come to the end there, really, but I just wanted to sort of ask, I mean, when you look back now on everything that you now know from your previous life before theatre to the theatre life and beyond, is there anything that you look back on you wish you'd done differently, or you would do differently now with the knowledge that you have?
I think I wouldn't have been so scared about moving away from London, or I wouldn't have questioned it so much. I mean, you can tell I questioned it quite a lot because I moved away, went back, moved away, went back, moved away again. So, and I would have, I'd have had more confidence in myself perhaps in to do that.
Yeah,
I think it's really hard for us all because we are bombarded with the London theatre mould, and we forget as an island, as Britain, we forget about the brilliance of work that ends up often in London, but has started out. It started in Scotland, it started, in Manchester, whatever, and we forget that. And I think that if we are to encourage people who perhaps don't come from a background where they can, if we're trying to encourage people who don't come from that sort of middle class background or whatever, that they can afford to live in London, or their families have been able to, that we're looking for a different demographic of people, perhaps, then we need to look out into the regions and all the rest of it. I was really lucky because I was doing it at a time that, I was blatantly cheeky and sort of got into London by saying that, to the college, you have to pay for me because I can't afford. Do you know what I mean? But there are a lot of, I think we've got to embrace and sort of look outside of London a little bit more and sort of embrace the amazing work and encourage people from those regions and that to get involved and to get into it, because it's so easy for us to kind of go, that's not for me, that's for the big folk.
Yeah. We need to.
And it's not. It is for all of us. It's just about getting that acknowledged in some way, and fighting for that. I mean, did you see? So Bruno Poet. I'm pretty sure he lives in Cornwall, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
And he's done, Cornish. I don't know if he is Cornish or not, but he made that move. He moved out. And he's been down there years. Yeah. And there he is, Tony Award winner from yesterday, which is brilliant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he did that move, I'm sure, for family and all the rest of it. So
yeah, it's about quality of life, isn't it? I think we're so used to being so busy and pushing for the next thing that I think we all push quality of life to the side, actually, and that's not good. We shouldn't be doing that.
And it's also recognising what is the brilliant theatre that is going on your own doorstep as well. It's not always brilliant in London, but there is stuff that's happening on your own doorstep if you don't live in London that could or is utterly amazing and life-changing and etc. And so if some person there who went to watch it, like I did all those years ago in the theatre when I went to see that Complicité show out of the blue, his mind just gets exploded. That's a really nice thing to think about.
Definitely. Before you go, I've been doing like 5 sort of quick fire questions with people. Some serious, some silly, but it's a good way to sort of round it up. So, one show that you would still love to work on?
Oh, Mnemonic. So when I did, it was a Complicité, and it was my first job out of college, and I was the production assistant, basically sweeping the floors. But I was doing a set as well and the rest of it. And we worked the show. And so I was crawling underneath stage and all the rest of it and doing all this stuff. And it was the most beautiful show.
Brilliant. Yeah. What's your favourite flavour of jam?
Plum. Oh, no, cherry. No, plum.
See, I knew that was a good one to put in. My family think I'm crazy asking things like that, but
I love a raspberry as well, but now I'm going to go plum because that's this time of year.
Okay. Do you have any preview rituals?
Other than being sick somewhere.
Yeah, that's a ritual, I suppose.
I don't know. Well, I used to smoke a bit. Not. I wasn't a brilliant smoker, but my ritual would be to stand in a dirty lane somewhere and have a cigarette. But I gave up smoking a few years back now, so so I can't do that anymore. But that would have been a terrible pre-ritual. I'm so nervous before any previews. I'm press nights. It's ridiculous. I don't like press nights at all. Yeah.
Oh gosh, what's your favourite season?
Autumn now. Beautiful. Yeah. Calvin Grove Park is just utterly amazing at the moment. Beautiful.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's fantastic of the season. And the final question that I've asked everybody: if you were to write an autobiography right now, what would you call it?
Oh, I want to say winging it, but that sounds really like negative, but it's not.
No, I don't think it's at all. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Winging it. That is great. We've had all sorts, so don't worry. That is.
I'll think of another amazing superhero one, and I'll go, "Oh, that should have been it."
Yeah.
I meant this.
Yeah.
Iron Man.
Yeah. Lizzie, that's us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and I hope it'd be really lovely to see you all. Whatever, I don't know. I hope you get a lot from this scheme that we're always doing because it's utterly brilliant, and I hope that you get to sort of get onto the mentor program at some point as well, but keep the faith and keep, like, if you've got the passion for it, just keep doing it. Like, yeah, it's a wonderful career path, career to choose. I think if you can, head into it, find a way to head into it. And also remember that all of us who have managed to kind of make a career out of it now, we're always at the end of an email. If you ever want any advice, whether it's bad or good advice or whatever, or do you know what I mean? It's like, we're just here, like, do you know what I mean? And if it can help at all, then that's always, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.